Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. With us today is Zach, your expert in all things procurement from KPMG. I am Conrad Smith, self-proclaimed innovator, worked at Intel, worked at Adobe, and now founder and CEO of Graphite, one of the coolest startup companies out there. And of course, as also with us is Natasha, the pro CPO, spending time at IBM, McKesson, Salesforce, and most recently, the CPO at Nike. Together, we bring you not quite 100 years, but we have a special guest with us that probably pushes us over the edge or gets us there with Mark Raffan. Natasha, you invited Mark to come to the podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about Mark and why he's such an amazing person?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for viewing us. Thank you for listening to us. Those of you who listened to our previous episode, you know that we were talking about tariffs. And in the middle of our conversations, I knew that there's exactly the person who we need to talk with, because Mark Raffan is a close friend of mine and a colleague who's been a procurement aficionado for 15 years. The last 8 of them, Mark has been founder and the CEO of Negotiation Ninja, an amazing negotiation training program that I had privilege of bringing Mark on board twice to my teams at Salesforce and Nike, and he trained my entire global team. He is also one of the pioneers of the procurement podcasts. He interviewed me first time in 2018. And his Negotiation Ninja Pod has over 1 million downloads. So, Mark, you have quite an amazing name in procurement. And with Proc-N-Roll, we intend to beat your 1 million downloads. We're almost there. I think we hit the first 1,000. But it's not a competition between the friends. So you and I have known each other for quite some time, worked together, partnered together, chatted together. When I started Kendra Procurement, actually, you and Conrad were one of the 2 people who explained to me that don't think about how hard it's going to be, because it will be hard, but do it anyway. So welcome to Proc-N-Roll, and thank you for meeting with us and considering the theme of tariffs.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have a good conversation with you all. I think it's a very interesting topic, and we're at a very strange and exciting time.
Oh, absolutely. Strange and exciting at the same time. So first of all, you are a proud Canadian. So congratulations with selecting a prime minister. Mark Carney is... he's certainly on a very challenging path. There is a lot of internal factors and kind of like turmoil, maybe too big of a word, but a lot of dynamic happening in Canada. Sluggish growth, a prospect, and an unfortunate prospect of becoming a 51st state, or at least a threat, a narrative, a deep political division within the country that hadn't been Canada's thing in the past, high cost of living, and so forth. So what is your perspective, like as a professional negotiator? What is your business, not political, but the business assessment of the situation today?
Yeah, from a business and negotiation standpoint, this is what's the best way to put this? This is a precarious but defining moment for Canada. So we're dealing with a complex mix of internal and external pressures, and there's, we've got these threats to sovereignty through annexation rhetoric, and we've got economic stagnation, and we've got cost of living pressures and mounting tariffs and all of these things. And for business leaders, what's clear is that uncertainty is now the norm, which is very different than what we've experienced in the past. And in negotiation, uncertainty is both a risk and an opportunity. And so the companies and the leaders that will thrive are the ones who can remain calm in the chaos, who can clarify their priorities and secure better terms, not by being aggressive, but by being strategic. And I think for Canada, the path forward needs to involve reshaping how we assert our economic identity on the global stage, especially with our largest trading partner, who is applying pressure, significant pressure to us. And for Canadian businesses, now is the time to sort of reevaluate our value chains, strengthen our supplier relationships, rethink how we define leverage in an interdependent economy. It's a very uncertain time, but there could be some significant opportunities for Canada if we play it right.
So if you were to coach your PM, what would be your guidance to him from the business perspective? Like, what leverage does he have? I agree with you that it's a moment of opportunity. What would be the right approach to use this opportunity in the most proficient and efficient way for the country that would have long-term positive consequences?
Yeah, so if I was going to coach the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, my first advice would be don't confuse power with leverage. They're very different. They're not the same. Canada does not have the same brute force power as the US. We just don't. But we do have leverage. We have rare resources. We have a highly educated workforce. We have stable institutions. We have global goodwill. We have phenomenal relationships abroad. And our job now is to turn that into leverage, into strategic influence. I think I'd probably also tell him that he needs to lead with clarity. Because we're in chaos, because there's so much confusion, clarity is what people are seeking. And in high stakes negotiations, ambiguity is exploited. So we need very, very clear lines. We need clear objectives. We need a clear narrative to rally allies and citizens and all Canadians. And it's very clear that we need that clarity. And probably the last thing I'd tell him is we need to negotiate in coalitions. Because we don't have that same brute force, that same power, we can't negotiate in isolation. If we try and negotiate in isolation, we're going to get stuck. And it's pretty clear that Mark Carney has, at least if you think about the rumor mill that's going on, has understood that in depth. And so aligning with the EU, aligning with Latin America, aligning with our Asia Pacific partners on trade and technology gives us more negotiation weight. And I think this is less about confrontation and more about controlled collaboration. So it would be foolish for him to try and outmuscle the US. But I think we can be very strategic with our allies and our collaboration.
All points are really amazing. I like the one where you mentioned clarity, leading with clarity, because to some extent, what Canada will be going through is what businesses go on a smaller scale when they go through transformation, right? When they realize that the positive dynamic that brought their business to the current point is not going to take them further. And there are a lot of changes that they need to make. They have to reestablish new connections. They have to build new processes. They have to bring in new systems and build new relationships. So leading with clarity is very important when you're doing it on a smaller scale within the business, when you're transforming business to a new form. And certainly the same applies when you're leading the country.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I think the problem that a lot of people face, especially in uncertain times, is they seek community, they seek clarity, they seek stability. And so I think he's done actually a very good job at being a stabilizing voice for Canadians. So if he can do more of that and keep leaning on that, then I think he's he's going to do great. He wasn't my first choice, but I'm happy to have him in the spot, and I definitely support him.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let's rehash a little bit our last episode, which triggered my interest in bringing you on board. And we were talking about tariffs, and what became quite clear in our conversation is that the current business environment with unpredictability, instability related to the tariffs and this massive volatility that exists is a brilliant opportunity for procurement professionals to shine. Because I think that the proverb that don't let the good crisis go wasted was actually created either by procurement people or for procurement. What's your perspective on this? Like overall, in general, where do you stand?
Yeah, I think if we play it right, this is our opportunity to lead as procurement, right? I think tariffs shine a spotlight on the areas procurement professionals have been warning people about for years. Over-reliance on a few suppliers, lack of transparency in supply chain, poor resiliency planning, right? All of those things are things that procurement people have been shining lights on for a very, very long time. And so now the C-suite is listening because they have to, which is great. And so this is kind of a unique window for procurement people to move from sort of a cost center to strategic advisor / profit center. But only if we play our influence properly. And so the professionals who step up with risk mitigation as a mindset, who can renegotiate terms, who can build diverse supplier portfolios, who can create agility in their supply chains, those are the ones they're gonna earn their spot to be able to influence at a higher level. And in some ways, the tariff pressure it's kind of forcing businesses to finally see that procurement is not just, the person cutting a PO, the tactical buyer, but they're a strategic risk manager, they're commercial architects, so to speak. So I'm hopeful that procurement can use this opportunity and good procurement leaders can use this opportunity instead of just getting stuck in the chaos of trying to deal with the situation, see it for what it really is, which is a phenomenal opportunity.
What do you see, Mark, in the individuals that have maybe through COVID or are now rising above the fray of the chaos and kind of everything else and establishing themselves with voice and influence and leadership? I mean, what if there's somebody out here listening today that's like, yes, I really do want to use this as that step up to more influence? What advice would you have for them sort of in a practical way to make those steps?
Yeah, so hopefully they're thinking 2 to 3 steps ahead, right? So I think the error that a lot of people make in this kind of situation is they're thinking with the immediacy of the problem, the chaos that surrounds them, and okay, let's just get through this next day. Let's just get through extending these contracts. Let's just cut this cost. That's the immediacy of the problem. I think the procurement professionals that are trying to think about influence are thinking of 2 to 3 steps ahead. And they're saying, okay, how can I use this to show where procurement is doing well and what procurement can do well? So they're coming to the C-suite, they're specifically their CFOs and their COOs, with a plan to reduce risk, short, medium, and long term. And they're not just dealing with the let's cut cost conversation. So my hope is that they're coming with the risk mitigation strategy and not just like the logic of here's how we deal with the problem, but also with the emotional side to it as well, with like, oh, here's how we deal with the problem, logic, yes. And if we don't do this, here's what will occur in the future. Do you want to experience this pain again? So really highlighting sort of the pain and pleasure side of the argument. I think that's really, really important. And my hope is that we've got some experienced procurement leaders who have been through some significant down cycles, right? Like 2008, for example, and potentially and COVID, right? So you've seen COVID and 2008. And so you can come with credibility to the table to say, hey, we've been through similar things before. Here's how we handled those situations. Here's how we can get better at dealing with this in the future. If we don't do it this way, here's the pain you're going to experience. But if you do it this way, here's all the benefits you're going to experience as well. And those benefits can't be focused on what procurement sees as benefits. That has to be seen as what the business sees as benefits. So as long as they can do that, I think they're in a good spot.
I love what you just said, because we keep bringing this theme that stop using procurement jargon, stop telling procurement stories, stop telling procurement benefits. Think more about the benefit for the business. And if you can't communicate the benefits for the business, then procurement is coming along. I don't want, generally, I don't like looking back and say could have, should have, but I think the current situation may be one of the very few when it may make sense to look back and think about, was there a way to prepare for the current tariff-heavy environment? Because many companies seem to be caught off guard while being heavily concentrated with not much diversification is an alarm bell. Should be in any business. Two questions to you in those lines. Was there a way to avoid it, or how could a company get prepared to it? And now take us to the future. What should we as procurement professionals and business in general, not just procurement professionals, because I hope that supply chain and finance professionals will listen to Proc-N-Roll at some point too. What can be done today to not experience some other stressful business environment in the future?
Okay. I'll break it up. So I'll deal with could we have prepared for this better, and then I'll talk about immediate coaching after. Could we have prepared for this better? Yes, absolutely. And also no. I don't think anyone could have predicted the exact political moves or the speed of the tariff escalation. I think that was an unknown. So to say that people could have predicted that, I think is unfair, but there were warning signs, right? And they've been there for a while. So trade volatility, global realignment, protectionist rhetoric, nationalist rhetoric, they've been building for the better part of a decade globally, right? So I think we probably could have seen that. The companies that are weathering this better are the ones that treated supply chain resilience as a strategic priority and not just a line item on the budget. Diversification, dual sourcing, nearshoring, all of those are easier to build during calm periods than during the crisis that we're in right now. So while I have empathy for companies that were caught flat-footed, I also believe that this is a wake-up call, right? Global strategy is no longer optional. It's core. It's core to stay competitive. And if you don't have it, then you're seriously missing the big picture, especially when you take into account geopolitical risk. And I think a lot of people have ignored geopolitical risk for a very long time. So that's dealing with whether or not we could have seen it. I think for what you could do now, immediate coaching, if I was going to coach any procurement leaders or professionals, there's probably a few things I would recommend. Number one, revisit and reframe your supplier relationships right away, right? You're not just asking for, my hope is, you're not just asking for concessions to reduce cost, but you need these suppliers. And that's clear. So collaboration on long-term agreements, I think, is going to be really important, and relationships are going to be really important. So bringing suppliers into the conversation early and asking, look, how can we reduce this cost together without sacrificing quality, speed, time, all of those things? And strategic suppliers are top right-hand quadrant suppliers are definitely going to be more open if than if you think you can just see it as like a cost-cutting exercise. So as long as you can see it as a long-term relationship, collaboration, I think it's going to be great, especially around the innovation side of the conversation, because I think there's some real benefits that we can do around that right now. So that's probably the biggest thing. The other things I would recommend doing are mapping and communicating risk. I don't think we've done a very good job of elevating this. So I think communicating this is very important. Getting your internal stakeholders aligned around where the real risk lies, whether it's financial or operational or reputational, and use that insight to prioritize mitigation plans. And we can be the quarterback around that. I think we do a very good job of identifying risk, but we haven't communicated it properly. And executives listen when procurement speaks in the language of risk and business continuity, not just cost. So we need to really change the way that we're shaping our conversation. And then probably the last thing I would recommend that they do is we need to try our best to push for as much flexibility in contracts as we can, renegotiating terms that allow for shared risk, more index-based pricing, more exit clauses where needed, locking in rigid terms in a volatile environment is going to be a mistake. So being cautious around that and building flexibility now is going to be hard. That even if it means slightly higher upfront cost to build in that flexibility, it may be worth it, right? Because it's going to save you on risk and margin later on. So that's probably what I would recommend the most. And all of this can be negotiated, by the way, right? Like, just because we're in a crisis doesn't mean that this isn't negotiable. It's obviously negotiable, but you just got to approach it strategically.
I loved what you said earlier about like coming in with a bigger strategic vision in mind as well, right? Because what I feel and what I'm gathering from what you're saying as well is that there are tactical things that need to take place, but they need to be done with a long-term view of what can we learn from this and how can it change. I mean, I heard a conversation last week, some leaders talking about Apple phones being made in India. For the United States market, like within 18 months. And one of the individuals on that podcast was like, just forget about it. That's impossible. There's no way they can spin up production that quickly to move all of that production over to India. As it turns out, another person in the conversation said, well, they have already been working on it, right? So the seeds that come out of COVID, because there's so many close parallels that I see here in terms of the kind of wake-up call that Natasha's talking about from COVID and then from this experience, it really should begin to guide people. Sort of the pendulum that swung from put your manufacturing and put your suppliers really focused on cost, now needs to come back to somewhere in the middle, like you're talking about. Yes, it may cost you more, but in the world that we live in, the one end of that pendulum is really probably an unhealthy place to live for a lot of strategic reasons for businesses and for countries, and just for the stability of the world economy as well.
Yeah, and just geopolitically as well, right? Because you've got, especially when you're thinking about the argument between China and the US right now, you've got these two behemoths that no one's backing down at this point in time. I'm sure someone will at some point in time. I have my predictions, but it's you're stuck in that situation, especially if you're a material based supply company and you're sourcing from China or one of its proxy states, right, like Vietnam or something like that. You're experiencing higher cost regardless. So it's going to be tough.
You brought up one point that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is partnership with suppliers. When things are rosy and when it's buyer's market, then a lot of procurement people approach relationships with suppliers from a dominating position, from the position of I'm buying from you. I'm dictating the price. I'm dictating the terms. I'm dictating the conditions. And because you're in business of making money, you do what I tell you. Probably when I started my procurement career 26 years ago, I probably had the same demeanor, quickly changed it because I realized early on how instrumental suppliers are for the business success. But I'm hearing from a lot of suppliers that there are not that many procurement professionals who subscribe to this philosophy of building true partnerships with the providers. Obviously, you cannot build it with everyone, especially in indirect space where you have a lot of providers. But share a little bit more your perspective on what is the good model of relationships between procurement and suppliers? Because you teach negotiation, and I think across two companies where I brought you on board, you probably cumulatively trained close to 400 or 500 people from my team. We also brought our colleagues from legal, from finance, and so forth to conduct your training. And while I didn't attend your classes, but I've heard that you don't believe in a win-win. So walk us and your listener and our listeners through, if you don't believe in win-win, but you do see now that suppliers are critical in partnering to solve current challenges, what is your philosophy with healthy and strong supply relationships with procurement?
Okay, so let me clarify my position on win-win first, and then maybe that'll be helpful. So I believe that win-win is a marketing term. It's not an actual strategy for negotiation.
Sounds good though, right?
It sounds amazing, right? When people hear it, they're like, oh yeah, let's win-win, right? And you're like, oh yeah, okay. What does that actually mean? And when you just scratch past the surface of that term, everyone's got a different definition as to what it actually means. And so I don't ascribe to the terminology, nor do I ascribe to the strategy. And when people hear that, they believe that, oh, if Mark doesn't believe in win-win, therefore he must believe in win-lose. And well, no, because that's actually built on the same premise as win-win. The truth of the matter is, in large, complex B2B negotiations, like we're all involved in, you cannot determine who has quote unquote won in the negotiation. We don't open up our books to each other at the end of the deal and go, well, how much did you get? And, oh, you got this, and let's split that, and let's share it. It's not real. It doesn't exist. It's fairy dust. It's make-believe. It's a fallacy. It's a farce. So we believe in goal-based negotiation. Goal-based negotiation simply states that we have certain goals going into the negotiation that we have to achieve. And each negotiation has a different set of goals, and we're going to work hard to negotiate for the achievement of those goals. We also realize that the counterparty has certain goals that they're trying to achieve in the negotiation. They're going to negotiate hard for the goals that they want to achieve in the negotiation. We recognize that we will have to sacrifice some of our goals, or at least a portion of our goals, to achieve the things that are most important to us. But as long as we can do that, then we're going to come out with a negotiation or a deal that makes sense for our organization. And that's our primary responsibility, and that's our purpose. We need to make sure that this makes sense for our organization. Otherwise, why are we doing it in the first place? And so when we think of it from that perspective, a lot of people think that that means cost, right? A lot of people think that that means, oh, I have to go in and save money. But it depends on what your primary objective is for that relationship, what your primary objective is for that negotiation. And so I think a lot of people, especially procurement people, draw conclusions, especially when they get messaging from their CFO in times like this, that cost and pricing, etc., are the number one objective. And that may be true for a lot of the negotiations, but it's certainly not true for the strategic negotiations that are very, very important to us in terms of the relationships that we have. However, I do have empathy for procurement professionals, especially those that haven't been in their roles for a very long time, because every procurement person has gotten the talk from their CFO over the last 3-4 weeks that has said, you will renegotiate every single contract that we have. We will have cost reduction, because CFOs are freaking out, right? Like all of this uncertainty, we need to reduce cost. We need to create stability. We need to do all of these things. And so naturally, whenever a procurement person is like, even like a new procurement leader is hearing that, they're batten down the hatches. They're instructing all of their teams to reduce cost at every opportunity that they can. And unfortunately, what that means is that strategic relationships sometimes get sacrificed for the purpose of reducing cost. And that is a mistake, because while reducing cost is very, very important, long-term health of those relationships is also very important. So I would urge every procurement leader who is listening to this right now, who has received the talk, and you all received the talk from your CFO, take that with a grain of salt and think of this not only just for the short term, but for the medium and the long term as well. There are going to be lots of opportunities for you to reduce cost, especially in tactical relationships where it doesn't, who cares, right? You're a commodity supplier. We burn and churn. It's no big deal. You need us as much as we need you, which is very, very little. Fine. No big deal. But there are long-term strategic relationships that maybe don't warrant that approach, or at least warrant a softer approach. So just try your best to approach it strategically, right? Think in terms of who your high risk, high spend relationships are with, and how you can leverage those relationships to be strategic about them instead of just approaching them with the hammer, which is what I see a lot of procurement teams doing these days.
It's definitely an interesting time because the suppliers, and who knows how these tariffs are going to unfold over the next, 30, 60, 90 days. For sure, you mentioned you had your predictions, but I suspect that the world is not going to be thrown into total chaos and confusion. Hopefully not. Hopefully things will move towards stability, right? We're all praying for that. And some of this rhetoric will be sort of walked back. But the suppliers need the buyers to survive, and the buyers need the suppliers to survive. Like this idea of working on it together and both having this goal, right? Both the buyer and the supplier are likely facing, on their own revenue side of the business and their own supplier side of the business, similar challenges. And that collaboration the collaboration in understanding and supporting as much as possible each other's goals in the discussion, tactically and strategically. It just seems like the only way to think about it.
Yeah, look, and I mean, even tactically, how this is manifesting a lot of my clients is that they're just negotiating in true-up agreements in their contracts, because they just don't know which way the tariffs are going to go. We're at like 145% with China. And so they're like, well, it could be 100% tomorrow, could be 0%, could be 25%, it could be anywhere. So let's just deal with it what it is right now. Let's make our best predictions for what it's going to be in the future. And let's create a true-up calculation that if you eat some more of the cost that we didn't anticipate, then we'll share that cost. If we eat some more of the cost that we didn't anticipate, then you'll share some of that cost as well. And so many of my clients are negotiating true-up formulas into their contracts tactically, just to ensure that their relationship is preserved, so that there is security on both sides. Both the supplier knows, like, okay, you're in this for the long haul. We've negotiated something that we'll figure out later. Yeah, we're going to eat some cost for now, but later on, we're going to make sure you're whole, and vice versa. So it's not fine for us to pontificate about this strategy that goes behind this, but tactically, there are some things that you can put into your agreements to make sure that both parties feel more comfortable with each other.
Beyond the true ups, do you have other suggestions? I know we're coming close to our time here, but I'd love to kind of have you share your perspective of what you're seeing on the ground. And, of course, everybody give Mark a call. I mean, I'm sure your phone's ringing off the hook these days with people struggling with negotiations. But what are sort of the top 5 suggestions tactically? I mean, you've given some really great advice already, but is there anything else in your mind that you haven't shared that really would be helpful to folks?
Yeah, try and take bias out of the agreements as much as you can. Any kind of way you can index your pricing to third-party standards with a lot of buffer room. So how you would have like an index price, but you might have like a buffer in that calculation. Those buffers are getting bigger just because the variance is significantly larger. So index-based pricing, true-up calculations, and then longer cycle times on price changes. So, you might have an MRO supplier that changes prices, that used to change prices monthly because of commodity changes. Now they're eating those costs for longer to try and create some stability in the pricing formula to be able to allow for that. So you might see like quarterly, 6 months, annual, and then taking into account the true up later on. Cash is going to be king. So any kind of way you can preserve cash during this time is going to be really, really important, but also realizing that your supply base needs cash to survive. So try not to push your supply base to the point of bankruptcy because you can't, give them cash for 120 days or something like that. Be reasonable about your payment terms, please. If you're asking suppliers to take on 120 days or something like that, or 90 days, they're not a bank and the cost of capital is high. So realize that going in, you're going to get higher prices if you force them to take on those higher payment terms.
Thank you, because as we said in the beginning, we're welcoming our listeners and viewers up to Proc-N-Roll, which is the guide to practical procurement. So I very much appreciate your practical suggestions in those lines. Please share with us, what is your AI utilization routine? How do you use AI in your daily work, in preparation to negotiation trainings, in preparation to your podcasts, and also where do you see the best practices, how other procurement peers of ours use AI?
It's evolving daily, literally daily in how I use it. I use it for a lot of idea generation in things that I do. So it's great for me for idea generation, creative thinking, all of those kinds of things. I almost use it like a team, like to say, hey, team, here are some ideas, shoot these ideas down. And I ask it to be very critical about my ideas. I think the downside to how the way that a lot of people use it is that they accept the answers at a surface level without being critical about those answers. And so I've tried to program my instance to be more critical about my ideas and to shoot ideas down. So probably sort of a bit of a masochistic approach to the use of AI, but I think it's very, very important. I use it in a lot of planning as well, and a lot of role play generation. So when we do our role plays in our training, it generates a lot of information that I then take and then tailor to whatever organization I'm working with. Comes up with some really creative stories that we can use and those kinds of things. So that's how I'm using it. In terms of how I'm seeing others use it, I think it's a very helpful tool in tactical negotiations. Where I'm seeing a lot of mistakes being made is for people that are new to negotiation or new to procurement, taking the answers that the AI provides about how I should react to this negotiation and just using that as the gospel. this is a mistake. So there's been some research that's been done recently that shows that people who know how to negotiate and use AI get better results. But people who don't know how to negotiate and use AI get actually worse results. So I would caution anyone who is utilizing AI without understanding how to use the information to be very, very cautious about the answers that it's giving you, because it may give you an answer to a specific set of circumstances that is bad, because it doesn't understand the context of the situation. It doesn't understand how long the relationship is. It doesn't understand where the relationship exists. It doesn't understand the internal politics that may exist at the C-level. There's so much complexity to large B2B negotiations that it's just not, it can't take into account because it just doesn't know. Right? So be very cautious about the answers that it gives.
I love this idea of asking it to be critical of you. It's almost like I see a future where I can have a therapist that I talk to every day that's really not like a human. So I can say a bunch of things to AI that I never really need to worry about sharing. And in this case, like letting down we all have an ego, right? But letting down that ego shield and just having AI be really critical back at us is a super powerful way to hear and anticipate and improve our thinking. Like that is freaking
I find
awesome.
it very valuable. I'm using it right now. One of the new experiments I'm using is for rejection therapy. So there's a great book that I would recommend everyone read called Rejection Proof. And it's by this gentleman named Jia Jiang. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. But the whole idea is to get better at dealing with rejection. And so to ask for outrageous things every single day and increase the difficulty of those things so that you never get comfortable. And so I've now prompted ChatGPT to give me ideas increasing with difficulty so that I ask for more difficult things every single day from just random situations. So yesterday, for example, I was flying to San Francisco, and my task for yesterday was to ask for an upgrade, to ask for an extra meal on the plane, and to ask for a tour of the cockpit. And I was rejected on 2 of those 3 things, but I asked. So making sure that like I'm putting myself in situations where and they could be like stupid things that have no benefit to your life, but just to ask is super beneficial. I'm finding it really, really fun, actually. So I've got a whole bunch of new stories.
Which one of the 3 did you get? I gotta know.
I got the extra meal. I was rejected on the upgrade, and I was rejected on the tour of the cockpit. But I'm going to ask again on the way home. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get.
Probably extra meal is the least thing that you were interested in, because
I didn't actually want the extra meal. I was done for my calories for the day anyway. Like I didn't need the extra meal, so I gave it to the guy next to me. But
in those 10 years that I've known you, now it's a half of you. So extra meal is
exactly.
Well, letting a Canadian.
I'm totally with you, and I think that every parent, this is how we should train our kids. If you don't ask, you certainly will not receive. But if you ask, there is a chance. What's the worst thing can happen? You'll get rejected. So what? So as a procurement professional, I embraced this philosophy early on. And I remember me and my daughter, we were shopping somewhere in Europe, and it was a small boutique, right? It's not the market. And I came to the cash register and I said, well, I bought this sweater and this dress and these shoes and this. I'm like, can you give me a discount? She's like, it's already discounted 25%. I'm like, but can you give me additional 10? And she looked at me with not kind feelings and said, okay. And then, and my daughter had like eyes like this. She was probably like 16, 17 at that time. And then I said, and can you give us as a compliment your scarf? Like there's a basket of the scarves rolled out at the cash register. She said, like, she was really at this point, and she's like, okay, just take it. And she probably said, and leave, right? And then I said, okay, one for me and one for my daughter. And at that point, I actually am a very modest person. I don't ask for a lot of things. And at that point, my daughter said, well, this is becoming extreme. We're leaving. But
You don't get it if you don't ask for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've got a bunch of tasks for today that I have to get rejected on. And the purpose is not to get the things. I know that sounds unusual. The purpose is to actually force myself to get rejected. Because I just want to get more and more comfortable with that idea.
Yeah.
And AI is giving you these daily lists of things to ask for?
Yeah. So I asked it basically to give me the prompts daily. So it's given me a list of like 30 things to do over the course of the next 30 days. And they increase in difficulty from a 7 to a 10 in difficulty of scale. And so we, a little bit of back and forth about what difficult actually is for me. And then now we're going to see. So I started at a 7 5 days ago, and we're going to get all the way up to 10. And then I'm going to probably just keep it going because it's just been fun to ask, like asking for a tour of the cockpit of the plane was fun.
I love hearing the unique ways that people are using AI. I mean, there's 12 months ago, it was like simple trivia almost, and it's just branched out into this, such a multifaceted way to learn and grow and bring value to our lives. And, if it's just awesome. I can't even imagine the future 2 or 3 years from now. It's going to be really cool.
That's amazing. I mean, Mark, it was great. I knew it will be great, but it exceeded all my expectations. Thank you for practical suggestions. Thank you for your deep insights. Thank you for sharing with us your philosophy. And I'm very happy I asked you the question about how you use AI, because you just shared a couple of very, very different approaches how we can utilize it. We shared with our listeners and viewers last time that suffering alone is no longer in fashion. And we offered ourselves, Conrad, myself, and Zach, as conversation partners if anyone needs support with negotiations, with strategizing how to get out of this situation. So if you don't mind, I will also offer you Mark Raffan to all Proc-N-Roll fans. And I think there's nothing greater we can do than help our procurement community from all angles.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me, both of you. I had a great conversation with you.
All right. We'll talk again soon. Enjoy your day and your return to Canada. Is that your home base back in Canada?
Yeah, flying back tomorrow morning.
Well, I'll be anxious to hear if you get a Canadian gets in the cockpit tomorrow or
I'm going to try my best. I'll send you a text. I'll let you know.
All right.
Enjoy
awesome.
the rejection.
Thank you.
Take care. Rock and roll, guys. Bye-bye.